Mariupol confirms an estimated 300 people died in last week's attack on a theater sheltering civilians. Russia says first phase of Ukraine's military operation mostly complete. Main war efforts to now focus on Donbass region. Plus, US President Joe Biden visits Poland as he wraps up his trip to Europe. Welcome to our special coverage of the war in Ukraine. I'm Millicent Wonwoka. It has now been over a month since Russia began its invasion of Ukraine late February, and fighting continues across the country. Although in its latest intelligence update, the UK's Ministry of Defence, says Ukrainian forces have retaken towns and defensive positions on the eastern outskirts of Kiev. And in one of the hardest hit area, Mariupol, the city council says around 300 people died in a Russian airstrike on a theater sheltering civilians 9 days ago. Let's get a quick update on the latest developments today.
Ukrainian officials say they believe 300 people may have died in the bombing of a theater turned shelter in the city of Mariupol last week. Thousands remain trapped there amidst daily bombardments, creating a humanitarian crisis. The head of the UN's human rights team in Ukraine says that monitors have received increasing information on mass graves in Mariupol, including one that appeared to hold 200 bodies.
If we look at Mariupol, clearly the number of deaths of civilian casualties there is significantly higher. We are trying to look into the scale. We have, for example, got increasing information on mass graves that are there. For example, one mass grave we've been able to get satellite information on, and we estimate that one of those mass graves holds about 200 people.
The UN also says it has confirmed that at least 1,081 civilians have died and 1,707 have been injured in Ukraine since Russia invaded the country. Ukrainian officials say 135 children have been killed. According to UK defense officials, Ukraine has had some recent success in retaking towns and defensive positions east of the capital, Kiev, though fighting continues across the country. Four people have been killed after Russian strikes hit a medical center in Kharkiv. According to local police, the city is under heavy bombardment but has not fallen. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry announced today that the first phase of military operation in Ukraine is mostly complete and that it will focus on completely liberating eastern Ukraine's Donbass region. The announcement appears to indicate that Russia may be switching to more limited goals after running into fierce Ukrainian resistance in the first month of the war. US President Joe Biden, who is in Europe this week, has issued a warning to Russia if it uses chemical weapons in Ukraine amidst concerns they could be deployed. The EU, meanwhile, has signed a deal with the US over liquefied natural gas as Europe attempts to wean itself off Russian fuel supplies it relied on in recent years.
So we want, as Europeans, to diversify away from Russia towards suppliers that we trust, that are friends, and that are reliable. And therefore, the US commitment to provide the European Union with additional at least 15 billion cubic meters of LNG this year is a big step in this direction, because this will replace the LNG supply we currently receive from Russia.
And Ukraine President Zelensky has told European nations that they had been a little too late to Moscow's threat, suggesting earlier sanctions may have prevented the war. He urges them to not be late in approving Ukraine's request to join the EU.
Не спізніться, будь ласка, бо за цей місяць ви порівняли.
As part of his Europe trip, US President Joe Biden is now in Poland for a first-hand look at the refugee crisis following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. After disembarking, President Biden met with a Polish delegation, including Defense Minister. The schedule was delayed after the plane carrying Polish President Andrzej Duda was turned back en route to Rzeszów and made an emergency landing in Warsaw. President Biden will receive a briefing on the humanitarian response to help civilians sheltering from Russian attacks inside Ukraine during his visit to Poland, and will speak to American troops bolstering NATO's eastern flank. Miroslava Godnadze, VOA Eastern Europe Bureau Chief, joins us now. Hi, Miroslava. Before we get to the US President's visit who is in Poland, tell us what happened to the plane carrying Polish President who was meant to, be in Warsaw. And will that meeting take place?
However, I'm so sorry, I didn't hear your questions because I'm losing your connection. But I have to say that first of all, I'm standing here near the protest of Ukrainians who came here to greet President Biden in Warsaw. They are singing their anthem right now, and over 2 million Ukrainians came to just this country running from the war in Ukraine. Could you please repeat your questions? Unfortunately, I didn't hear it.
Miroslava, it seems there's a lot of excitement due to President Biden's visits, but I was asking before we get to President Biden, that what happened to the plane carrying the Polish president that was meant to meet the president in Warsaw?
There's not many details on that issue, but however, what I heard and what media reported here, it was malfunction of some sort, technical malfunction of the plane, and they had to do emergency landing. So the president came back to Warsaw, changed the plane immediately, and went back. So President Duda is in Rzeszów right now, meeting with President Biden.
So what else is on President Biden's plate? As he visits the Polish town near the border and, of course, troops bolstering efforts in eastern Ukraine.
President Biden just talked to just a second ago. We were witnessing how he met American troops in Poland, and he made very passionate speech to them, talking about the war in Ukraine. He mentioned that he'd been to Ukraine many times, and he, as we know, visited Ukraine over 8 times during his senator career and during his when he was vice president. I was with him on one of those trips, and he told me personally that he feels Ukraine. So today, talking to American troops here in Rzeszów, he said that Ukraine is fighting for democracy in the world, and the world after this war would never be the same. He thanked the troops, American troops, for standing strong and supporting Ukraine and be ready to support and defend NATO countries. And he as well know that almost 100,000 American troops right now in eastern border, eastern flank of NATO, and that's the unbelievable number. This is the biggest number of troops since Cold War. So this is one of the main reason why President Biden is here. Second reason, the refugees. He is pledging to United States, is pledging 100,000 refugees to take to United States, and to support a refugee support system here in Poland, because there's so many Ukrainians here, and they're from Poland become a battleground for those refugees. They become a platform for supporting Ukrainians who are running from the war. So President Duda asking for more help, because this is a very, very difficult for the country, for Poland, to actually sustain that many people here in this country.
And I'm sure there is a lot of excitement there where you are. We can hear that. Tell us also, in that meeting, direct meeting with US President and Poland, we know that the Polish president has suggested international peacekeeping forces in Ukraine Has that cropped up yet?
So far, we did not. The bilateral meeting supposed to happen only tomorrow. Today, they would observe the troops. They would talk to the support agencies there on the border. However, I don't think we would have more information today, but tomorrow possibly. Poland is pushing. Poland is a kind of on the front line, and they feel the pain, and they feel and they are afraid that they can be the second. So that's why they are actually the one who is not only asking to organize the peacekeeping forces in Ukraine, and NATO forces in Ukraine. They are asking for total ban on Russian energy resources for European Union, to buy from Russia for European Union, as well as total ban on any trade with Russia and Belarus. So Poland is the strongest partner in this fight for Ukraine and against Russia. However, I think we would know the details on negotiation just tomorrow.
Many thanks, Miroslava, VOA correspondent Miroslava Gogadze, joining us there from Poland. Thank you. Well, Professor Akingbode, Professor of International Law and Jurisprudence, joins us for more on the situation in Ukraine. Thank you, Professor, and welcome to the program.
You're welcome.
Let's begin with 1 month since the invasion of Russia to Ukraine. What's your assessment? Are you surprised that the invasion still continues?
Well, I want to congratulate the Ukrainian people for their heroic resistance against Russian imperialism. Vladimir Putin, if anything, is a bully. And the only thing a bully respects is equal force to his antics. So the Ukrainians are proving their mettle, and they've established that the Russian army is not invincible. I think they have earned the respect of the entire world, and now Putin is left with egg on his face. I don't know what his game plan is. I don't know what he plans to do, but nothing can remove from the bravery and heroism of the Ukrainians. Now, since I lived in the Ukraine for upwards of 6 years, I know the Ukrainians are a sturdy, hard-headed people. In Russian, you could say a Ukrainian is a mujik, so a stalwart, so to speak. And I think the Russians took them for granted, and they are getting more than they expected. 1 month after, I think the people of the world now recognize that you can't push over Ukrainians, come what may. And that is why I think Zelensky is asking the rest of the world to provide the necessary munitions, aside from political support, to ensure that his fight for freedom and for independence and territorial integrity of his country remains intact. That's my summation of what has happened in the last 4 weeks.
Professor, we've seen the US president, who is in Poland at the moment. Before that, he was at the NATO meeting, the G7 meeting, in his trip around Europe, and said that NATO has never been more united. He said it is the opposite of what President Putin expected. And we also have NATO that says 4 new groups will be sent to some of the countries on the eastern part of Europe, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania. Do you think that there is still a real threat of this invasion escalating to other countries?
Well, when I was with you a few weeks ago, I said that we're at the precipice of the Third World War. I think the NATO powers are trying to extend the conflict without drawing the line on the sand for Vladimir Putin. If Putin knows that there is a resolve by the Western countries to back up and support Ukraine, then he will change his tactics. But he believes that the West is weak, they are afraid to fight, and he wants to fight as much as possible. And in fact, if he succeeds in overwhelming and overrunning Ukraine, then of course, other countries are to be gobbled down. The weaker the West portrays itself, the more emboldened Vladimir Putin becomes. That is what I see in what is going on right now. I foresee danger for the rest of the world for as long as the rest of the world is not acting decisively to call the bluff of the dictator in the Kremlin. So I believe that we are yet to see the end of this debacle, and there has to be a universal resolve to fight aggression, to fight terrorism, and to resist the diktat of the Tsar, the new Tsar in the Kremlin.
And there is a bit of news that has been reported today, a few hours ago, that Russia plans to focus war on eastern Ukraine. It's reported that the chief of the Russian army says the focus will be on the complete liberation of the eastern Ukrainian Donbass region, saying that Russia had been considering two options for its special military operation. One was covering the whole of Ukraine and then the other focusing on Donbass. What do you think has led to this? And is it hoped that perhaps Russia is realizing that it is fighting a losing battle?
Yes, I think I agree with your last observation, that it seems that Putin has been pushed to the wall and is revising his military tactics. Donbass is the core of the Ukraine in terms of production of wheat as well as steel. So if he succeeds in subduing Donbass, then of course that will push him to fight for the jugular, to capture Kiev. Kiev has become so difficult for the Russian army to subdue. They've taken all sorts of measures and steps in Kharkiv, in Odessa, Mariupol, but Kiev is the prize jewel of Ukraine. So going to Donbass, as it were, to prove his mettle, for me, is a last-ditch effort to refurbish the reputation of the Russian army. This army is not like the Red Army that we knew in the old Soviet Union. I think the Russian army today is dispirited. They are in tatters. And in fact, the more Russia changes its tactics, the more leeway you give the Ukrainians to resist and fight to the last man. It's a pity that the West has not met force with force, because the West seems to be afraid of the Third World War. Whereas for as long as Putin believes that the West has no muscle to fight, he will become bolder and bolder. So his change of military strategy, for me, is no answer to the resolve of the Ukrainians to fight to the last man. So quite sincerely, I think the West has to revise its options and put, as it were, Putin on the defensive more and more, so that Putin will calculate the cost of losing his very strange debacle in the Ukraine. And because just like during the Second World War, you had the Ukrainian front, you had the Belarusian front. We cannot leave Ukraine alone to contain the aggression by the Kremlin. I think the West has to advise itself to change tactics, as it were. Sanctions will take too long for them to have the desired effect. But nothing is more decisive than military muscle. So my advice to the West is to give an ultimatum to Putin, failing which he will rule it. As I said, somebody like Putin has respect only for superior force. It's not
Professor,
statements, diplomatic statements.
we appreciate your time always on the program. Thank you so much, Professor Akinwebode, Professor of International Law and Jurisprudence. Thank you for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here.
Still to come on the program, Russian President Vladimir Putin accuses the West of trying to cancel Russian culture. That's in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has urged Russia not to use nuclear, biological or chemical weapons in Ukraine. Speaking during a visit to Bardufoss military base north of the Arctic Circle, he says the use of such weapons would totally change the nature of the war in Ukraine. He adds that Russia contests core principles for our security, referring to Russia's security demands to NATO in December 2021.
Any use of chemical weapons or nuclear weapons will totally change the nature of the war in Ukraine. It will be absolutely unacceptable, and it will be a blatant violation of international law. And therefore, allies have also clearly stated that Russia should not use chemical, biological, or, of course, nuclear weapons. Putin's war against Ukraine have fundamentally changed the security reality in Europe. And it has created a new normal for our security. So even if the war ended tomorrow, it will have some lasting effects. Because what we have seen is that Russia is willing to contest core principles for our security.
More Africans are still in the city of Kherson, awaiting evacuation from their governments or other arrangements. The Nigerian government had said it was discussing with Russian authorities on a safe corridor for evacuations. According to the Nigerian ambassador to Russia, details were still being worked on. It is not clear where they have gotten to with that yet, but it's been 1 month since the invasion, and we speak to some African students who have been stuck in the city since the invasion. Charles Ogaji joins us from Kherson. He's a mariner. Also, Mr. Babalola Deji, a volunteer with the group Diaspora Relief for Ukraine. They both join me on the program now. Welcome both of you to the program. All right, let me begin with you, Charles. You are still in Kherson, and it's been 1 month already since the invasion. You've been stuck there. I mean, how are you doing?
Well, thank you very much for bringing my life today. It's been 1 month. Actually, like you said, you're very correct. Isn't easy being in the basement for the past 30 days. This is one of the situations whereby no one has ever expected to survive. You think about our mental health, our ability, our thinking faculty, how we think about what is going to happen next to us isn't easy. Being in the basement is really something that we took so many time to think about how we're going to survive. But today, for the past 4 weeks, we've been trying to cope with the conditions. The times of going to refresh, times of going out, I think it's much better now that we can be able to go out and refresh and come back to the basement.
When you say situations are better than before, how so? And what's the difference? Perhaps the first 2 weeks different from the last week?
Earlier week, when the invasion occurred, it was really a form of destruction, just like you see it on the internet, just like you see all over the world. Nothing about this is fake. Everything is real. You know, sometimes when we live in an environment, you see missiles or war planes passing through the air, you hear a lot of blasts. It really doesn't occur practically where I am, but you know, very close to us. But when you're listening to this, it kills you psychologically. And this time is a little bit better because we could be able to evacuate some sect of people for the past 4 days. Four set of people with the content of 4 in a car have been evacuated successfully to border. So it looks more better than before. We usually don't even use to go to the cabin, but at this time we can go to the cabin in the morning and return back to the basement at night. So it's a little better.
Okay, Charles, I'll come back to you shortly, but Mr. Babalola Deji has just joined. He represents Volunteer Relief for Ukraine. Thank you, Mr. Deji. Tell us about your assessment from all that you've been hearing, all you've been gathering. I know you've been in touch with lots of students and others that are still in Kherson.
Well, Babalola?
Yes. Thank you, Millicent. I volunteer for diaspora
Go
relief.
ahead, Babalola. We would like to hear what you've been able to gather, your discussions with students in Kherson and perhaps other Nigerians, what the situation has been from your angle as a volunteer of the relief group.
Okay. So we got to hear about Kherson. It was quite intense because they were stranded. Some people were stranded in the villages, and some people were stranded in Kherson Center. We had various people from various nationalities. We still have some Nigerians and Africans, like Don Charles Ogaji here is still in Kherson. Although we were able to evacuate some people yesterday, they were able to get into Romania early this morning.
So we were speaking to Charles earlier, and yes, Babalola, there's something Charles said that before now it was very difficult because of the destruction and the missiles. But I think things are a little calmer now. But how have you been able to, get those four out? I mean, Charles, I'm sure Charles wants to leave. What is that process taking you?
Well, we were able to locate, get in contact with some drivers that are experienced on the routes. And basically what they did was to get to checkpoints, slow down at some points, wait at 5 hours just so that they get report that the coast is clear before they continue. But so far, we've been able to evacuate people. We still have some people stranded on ground. We have about 20 people still left in Kherson. So we're hoping we get them out soon.
Charles, let me come to you. And this is asking about support, supplies, and a bit of that. Have you, been able to get access to all of that? And then your family as well in Nigeria, have you been speaking to them?
Yeah, okay, thank you once again. Concerning support, just like diaspora reliefs just said, the representative, they have done very well in aspect of supporting the evacuation of the first set of people who must have left to the nearest border. And they also try to make provision of how we're going to have access to food earlier. But the consequence of living in a war zone is when you do not have a steady returns of this item, you're really going to run out of them. And concerning the family back in Nigeria, it's been a situation as a Marine Navy, I do not really give them the appropriate information about what is happening in the environment because they will be feeling so protected. So I give them the hope that everything is going to be fine while I find myself in this situation.
Let's talk about the Nigerian government. We've heard that they were planning to indeed take out some students, some Nigerians through the Russian route. What last did you hear about that plan?
Earlier, before the invasion occurred, I believe there are so many units, so many Nigerian in different cities who have tried to reach out to Nigerian government embassy. And their response to this set of people was, you find your way and be safe. Let's look at what is going to happen. We know that this is a war coming. This is an invasion. If you can reach out to these people, a lot of them tried personal information on how to get out of this place earlier, but because of the confidence, Nigeria embassy, the representative here has given most of the people in Ukraine, made them to look so relaxed until this imminent takes place. And concerning the present situation and the support we're getting from Nigeria, actually, I have not gotten any support from Nigeria relating to the evacuation of this set of people who have gone. And the plan of taking people through Crimea was unacceptable by some of the students in Ukraine because this is a human abuse from Russia, and you are expecting Nigerian students to go through the same route back to Russia, and they are students. How do you expect them to come back and study here if they are getting the stamp? So we look at this negativity aspect, and most of these people decide never to accept going to the route of Crimea and to the Russia. So a lot of them left behind, and who has caused a lot of drownings of people in the basement being stuck, stinking, and they find it so difficult to live until these NGOs have to come in, like diaspora relief, come in and find a way, communicate with the citizen who could be able to find a safe route and evacuate so many set of people. And we could be able to leave behind because we set people to look after their safety first.
Charles Ogaji, we hope for the best, that you can leave there as quickly as possible. And we'd also like to thank Babalola Deji, volunteer for diaspora relief, the support you're giving to Nigerians and other students that are still stuck in Kherson. Thank you both for joining me on the program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
According to the United Nations, 3.7 million people have fled Ukraine since the start of the war, and 6.5 million are internally displaced. For many who are unable to flee, the World Food Programme says 45% of people in Ukraine are worried about finding food, and 1 out of 5 people, especially in encircled areas such as Mariupol, use food coping strategies.
L2. The World Food Programme is deeply concerned that families in embattled areas, and especially Mariupol, are having ever greater problems finding food. Lack of access to conflict-hit areas and a lack of humanitarian partners on the ground are the biggest obstacles to providing life-saving assistance to families inside of Ukraine. The encircled city of Mariupol is running out of its last reserves of food and water. No humanitarian aid has been allowed into the city since it was encircled on 24th of February. The only way to reach the city is through humanitarian convoys, which until now have not made it through.
And in the space of just a month, over 10 million people have been forced to run for their lives and leaving behind homes and belongings. And over 6.5 million of them are displaced inside Ukraine, and around 3.7 million of them have been forced to flee the country. And these numbers are rising by the day.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has accused the West of trying to citing the black ash against British author J.K. Rowling. Now, in a televised remarks, he mentioned Russian music and literature. President Putin said today the West are trying to cancel a 1,000-year-old country. He said Russian culture in the West is facing progressive discrimination and Russian books had been cancelled. He likened cancel culture to Nazis trying to burn books in the 1930s. The Russian president also mentioned how British author J.K. Rowling had been cancelled because she didn't satisfy the demands of gender rights. And UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has spoken to China's President Xi Jinping about the invasion of Ukraine. According to Downing Street, the call lasted around 15 minutes this morning. It's understood that Johnson said pressure should be put on President Vladimir Putin to withdraw troops from Ukraine, while President Xi reportedly expounded on China's principled position, stressing the need for the international community to make genuine efforts to promote peace talks, create conditions for a political settlement of the Ukraine issue, and facilitate an early return of peace in Ukraine. He also expressed China's readiness to play a continued constructive role to this end. It comes a week after US President Joe Biden held a nearly 2-hour phone call with Xi. The UK Home Office has announced that some 20,100 visas have been issued by the country to Ukrainian refugees with family links to the UK. On Thursday, the government had received 35,500 applications under the Ukraine Family Scheme, which launched earlier this month. The UK has been increasing its visa offer to refugees from the Ukraine war, extending it to parents, grandparents and siblings, as well as immediate family, and lengthening the visas to 3 years. But it has faced criticism that its scheme is less generous than the European Union's, with member states allowing Ukrainian refugees in for up to 3 years without a visa. Our London correspondent Julianna Lanca joins us now for more. Julianna, good to see you. Let's begin with the telephone call between Prime Minister Johnson and the Chinese president. What more are you learning at this time?
Issue pointed out between Xi Jinping and Boris Johnson as frank and candid, and that it was not really about a nation-to-nation discussion, but of course to discuss the geopolitics of the world, which is and the fallout because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think observers have been pretty cautious about China's response to what's been happening over the past month. Some would describe them as being pretty neutral. We haven't yet heard a public rebuke of Putin by President Xi Jinping. And I think Boris Johnson, fresh from the extraordinary NATO meeting yesterday, wanted to pile some pressure on the nation and try to avoid China becoming the go-to power player in retaliation or in response to some of these pretty strong sanctions that have been imposed on Russia by the West. Last week, Xi Jinping did speak to President Joe Biden, where I think the US made it pretty clear that in terms of China's economic future, it seems to be more tied closely to the West in terms of imports and exports than to Russia. So even though the nation has found itself in a pretty strategic position, they need to think very, very carefully about just how much support they give to Vladimir Putin. There have also been some suggestions that behind the scenes, Russia has called on China to assist them in any way they can, both economically and military. And that's, of course, a red line that NATO and its allies will not accept. We've seen with Belarus that any close ties or any sort of aiding of Russia will see you swiftly sanctioned by Western leaders.
When we last spoke, we talked about the UK Homes for Ukraine scheme. How is that getting along so far?
Yes, so the Homes for Ukraine scheme, just to remind viewers, is a sponsorship visa route that Britain set up, and it's been run by Senior Cabinet Minister Michael Gove. And it basically allows Britons who qualify after being vetted to open up their homes to a Ukrainian refugee for a minimum of 6 months. You get a stipend of £350 to say thank you. And today we are just starting to see the first set of Ukrainian refugees being matched to their families. It hasn't dominated news as much as it did last week. I think the legislation is still very opaque, very new. As you were just saying, it has faced a lot of criticism. Some think, again, it's just, piled up with layers upon layers of bureaucracy. The fact that any Briton, and I believe there are 150,000 people who signed up, anybody who wants to take on a Ukrainian in their home must name the Ukrainian individual once you begin your application. So over the past couple of days, lots of independent technology actors in Britain have tried to set up portals to make it so much easier for Brits to be matched with Ukrainians. So it is facing lots of hurdles, but that is one of the most solid routes for those who are fleeing to get into the UK.
Perhaps a little briefly, Julianna, just yesterday the UK announced further sanctions on Russia, adding to the long list of measures since the invasion began. But how far is the UK willing to go for Ukraine, and are these sanctions also affecting Britons?
Well, the sanctions certainly shouldn't be affecting Britons. They should be affecting Russians. Of course, that's exactly what it's designed to do. And there have been 1,000, just as Biden touched down in Brussels. Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, did announce these further sanctions on, I believe, 60 targeted individuals, businesses, elitists living here in the UK, one of them being Sergei Lavrov, the Foreign Minister of Russia's stepdaughter, who owns a £4 million home in Kensington, as well as 6 other banks and the Wagner Group, which is supposed to be a private paramilitary group. It's been described as Putin's personal army, but it's now the list of sanctions has grown to over 1,000. Again, it was short and probably slow in starting off, but Boris Johnson and this government are really keen to put their foot forward to show the world that even though London is apparently filled with dirty Russian money, not my words, they are doing their best to clean it up.
Thanks, Julianna Lanca, our London correspondent, joining us there. Many thanks again. Welcome back. Well, joining us, Mr. Paul Dillon, who is the spokesperson for the International Organization for Migration. Hi, Paul, and thanks for joining me on the program. First, how would you describe the migration situation as a result of the Russian invasion?
Yeah, good evening, and thanks very much for having me. Look, we've all seen these compelling and terrible stories from Ukraine over the last 4 weeks. The images of families living in crowded basements, having to melt snow to drink water, the crowded hospital wards full of war wounded and injured, and these attempts, these long convoys of cars and trucks privately owned, trying to get out of the most affected areas. It is a very complex, very dangerous and deeply troubling situation at the moment, both within Ukraine proper, where just in the last few days, IOM has been able to report the results of a survey that found there is almost 6.5 million people displaced by this war. And as we know, over 3.7 million people have already crossed the border into neighboring states. And if you think about that figure of 10 million people total, either displaced or on the move across borders, this is similar to the population of a mid-sized European state. This is the population of Greece or Portugal. So the situation is very dire. The humanitarian needs are compelling, both in Ukraine and in the neighboring countries where these millions of people have arrived, primarily women and children, overwhelmingly so, who have very serious needs for shelter, a place to sleep at night, protection, and just the essentials of life.
Many countries have indeed opened their doors, like you've alluded to. It's remarkable the support they're also getting. But can the IOM do anything about having total humanitarian corridors? And this is for people to get to safety.
I mean, the International Organization for Migration is part of the UN system. We have been advocating, as the Secretary General has at the highest levels, for the creation and maintenance of humanitarian corridors. It's important for the combatants to understand the humanitarian imperative here to get people out of harm's way, to remove civilians from the battlefield, and to maintain those corridors over time. opening up a highway. When we talk about a corridor, we're talking about a highway, basically, having the people on the checkpoints step back and allow for the orderly movement of people out of harm's way is essential. Not just to remove them from harm's way, but indeed to establish the necessary pipeline in order to ensure that people who remain in those areas get the humanitarian assistance, the food, the water, the medicine, the shelter supplies, the things that they need to continue to live.
What can you tell us about the situation in Mariupol?
Again, we don't, IOM, although we have a very large mission in Ukraine that goes back over 25 years, we are unable at this point to get into Mariupol. We are watching as the human family is watching the events unfold in Mariupol and places like Sumy and Kharkiv with growing alarm. The issue here is, and to reference back to your question about humanitarian corridors, it's one thing to have humanitarian assistance in country. And certainly there's more than enough need in areas that are not directly war affected. In the last couple of days, we've delivered thousands of items, hygiene kits, warm blankets, and so on to people in areas to which they have been displaced within Ukraine. It's another matter entirely getting humanitarian assistance into places like Mariupol and others where the bombs continue to rain down.
Also, we understand the IOM has appealed for about $350 million to support response to the crisis. Have you started meeting the targets? Are you also optimistic that you will get more?
I mean, the international community and the private sector and individuals have been very generous, but the demand is very high and the needs are compelling. Our request is for assistance to help us to do the things that IOM has been doing for 70 years in these kinds of situations, which is delivering humanitarian assistance, getting people out of harm's way. And a particularly interesting element of all of this, and often overlooked, are the numbers of third country nationals, including, for example, Nigerians, who have found themselves trapped in this space. Now, we know over the last 3 or 4 weeks that close to 200,000 third country nationals have fled Ukraine into neighboring states. We are getting phone calls regularly from our member states appealing for our assistance to help those people to return home safely. In the last week or 10 days or so, we've helped over 700 people return to Côte d'Ivoire, to Ghana, and to a number of other countries, Azerbaijan, Lebanon, and other countries. And so this is something we're deeply concerned about because these people are stranded there. Many of them are students, for example, young people who are pursuing a better life in their higher education in Ukraine when the war started. And now they are, many of them, trapped still in Ukraine, and others have crossed the border and are anxious to get home.
And Paul, that is the question we've been asking. For example, we spoke earlier to some students stuck in Kherson, and we know the situation. It's a city that is said to be under Russian control. So what happens to them? They said they've been trying to find their way out, and the option of government has been to go through Russia.
Well, I mean, people are going to find... They find themselves in exactly the same circumstance that the citizens and Ukrainian nationals find themselves in, which is to be trapped, as I described earlier, in basements, listening to the shelling and trying to survive. The routes that they take out will be prescribed by where safe exits can be found. Our hope is, and our appeal is, and our continuing message is that the guns must silence. There must be a ceasefire. There must be an opportunity to get in and assist these people, to help them, those who want to leave, to get them out to safety, and to assist those who have these compelling humanitarian needs in the war-affected areas.
And finally, I know that this invasion seems to be top news around the world, unprecedented numbers, refugees and the migration, but then there are other pressing work that is also ongoing around the world that may suffer due to this crisis in Ukraine, right?
I mean, sadly, we share this concern. Kabul was taken in mid-August 2021. A country that has, in its own right, and we have seen again and again, some serious and compelling humanitarian needs, arguably the largest humanitarian catastrophe on the planet. Yemen equally, the needs there, and we are deeply concerned that the focus on one particular area, one particular crisis, may draw attention away from these other areas. And this is why when we speak to our donors, when we speak to our member states, we iterate the need. Please don't take your eye off these other situations to which we are responding along with our humanitarian partners, because the needs are equally, in some cases, more compelling there than they are in Ukraine and the surrounding states.
Mr. Paul Dillon, spokesperson for the International Organization for Migration, thank you very much for joining us on the program. We wish you the very best in the work that you do.
Thank you.
And a refugee from Ukraine who fled the country along with her daughter has won the women's race in Israel's Jerusalem Marathon. 32-year-old Valentina Vereketsa finished a 26.2-mile race with a time of 2 hours, 45 minutes, 54 seconds. Veretska's husband is still in Ukraine fighting against the Russian invasion and the country's military. While celebrating her victory, she held up the flags of both Israel and Ukraine.
CEO of Jerusalem municipality.
It was a very difficult marathon, but we did it. I hope today everybody hear me, and I send my love. I send full my life to all the world to make a peace.
Talk about a fighting spirit. Well, that's the program this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Melissa Walker.